Good evening. Also, we find mention in the books of hadith in terms of what to protect our tongues from, how not to use our tongues. And this is something that's it's common, it's rampant, and the effect of the surroundings that we're in, what's considered acceptable speech in society, and how that's rubbed off on the notion of normal people, of what's considered acceptable and unacceptable. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, إِيَّاكُمْ وَالْفُحْشِ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ تَبَارَكَ وَتَعَالَى لَا يُحِبُّ الْفُحْشِ وَلَا التَّفَحُّشِ. The Prophet ﷺ said, beware from vulgar talk. Because indeed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't like vulgarity, whether that's from a person or whether that's put on through takalluf. Tafahush means to be takalluf. So here the Prophet ﷺ is ordering us away from this notion of evil talk. So what constitutes evil talk, and what's meant by fahish and fahash talk in the Sharia? So there are different interpretations amongst the ulama, and one interpretation and understanding of fahash is swearing. And the second understanding is to speak of something that generally is considered not appropriate to other people. And it's something that from others who have a sense of morality, you'd hide that conversation from. So if we take the first understanding of swearing, swearing has become a normal part of people's conversations. Swearing for the most mundane of reasons. Swearing over a football match, over a goal being scored, over someone getting out in cricket, and it results in a swear coming out. The Prophet ﷺ in another hadith, he says, لَيْسَ الْمُؤْمِنُ بِالطَّعَانِ وَلَا اللَّعَانِ وَلَا الْفَاحِشِ وَلَا الْبَذِيءِ. That a believer is not one who excessively vilifies others. Ta'an is also a very bad characteristic of people. Always finding faults in other people. And you're like this, and this person's like this, and this. Constantly doing that. Everybody else, there's an issue with them, and we find an issue with them. Nobody is of the piety of our own level. So ta'an, to constantly vilify others and to put them down and to speak evil, even if it's not behind their back, in their face. This is what's meant by ta'an. That every time some people you stay away from. Some people you make a point to stay away from them, because if I see them, they're going to say something that's going to upset me. Every time. Even meeting certain people, their characteristic, their demeanor is so evil, you don't even want to meet them because of how they use their tongue and what they, we're not very, we don't think about other people's, how they feel and their emotions and what hurts them and what upsets them. I've mentioned this before. The Prophet ﷺ has commanded us to do salam with one another. It's from the sunans of the Prophet ﷺ to meet each other with salam. And in one hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, لا تدخلوا الجنة حتى تحابوا. You won't enter paradise until you develop love for one another. أفلا أدلكم على شيء إذا فعلتموه تحاببتم. Shall I not point you in a direction that if you do this particular act, love will increase amongst you? So the Sahaba said, of course, Ya Rasulullah. So he said, أفشوا السلام بينكم. If you want to develop love with one another, say salam to one another. But the salam has to be done properly as well. It has to be done with the right intention. And people who come to Jummah have heard me speak about this before. But you have to the underlying intention of greeting someone is to develop love. Is to develop love between one another. But how many times have we seen that we do salam with others, and if we don't like the person, if the person is following a different madhab to us, they read salah different to us, they say Ameen loudly or they don't say it loudly enough for us, salam brother. It's like a frown on the face when you say salam. It's almost as if you're angry whilst you're saying salam. It's not understanding the deen. Yes, the Sharia has commanded us to say salam to one another, but understand why it's said to do salam. So some people, where am I coming from? Some people, when they meet someone, they always have something negative to say. Assalamu alaikum, sister. Oh, you've put on weight. Are you pregnant? La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Salam, sister. Any children yet? Oh, Allah. What type of, what is this? You comment on the person's weight. You comment on how they look. You comment on how they dress. Tawbah, tawbah, tawbah. That is not the objective of salam, that whilst you convey this sunnah, you put a person down at the same time. This is ta'an. Constantly vilifying people. Speaking about them, even whilst doing salam. I mentioned once that I was doing wudu downstairs. And as I was making wudu, our wudu area happens to be right next to the toilets. And you know, it's the layout. We weren't, I wasn't involved in the layout of the masjid when it was developed. Otherwise, there would have been doors separating that area. You know, alhamdulillah, it is what it is. And inshallah, when we do the fundraising and you all donate and we redevelop the downstairs area, we'll ensure that things are put in place, inshallah. But we're right now, and even sometimes I feel very, very awkward if you're in the toilet and the adhan is going on and the mic is a bit loud, that you can hear everything inside. So, you know, when you're in the wudu area, so someone said salam to me. So I was on near the last wudu stands next to the toilet. So, and the brother was literally just came in to the wudu area right at the far end. So he shouted salam from there. So I said softly back, wa alaykum as-salam, as I was about to start wudu. Brother, don't you know it's wajib to say salam back? Why did you give me salam? To test me whether I say salam or not? Was that your intention? To see whether I say salam back or not? That ta'an, constantly looking for the fault of someone or constantly picking on somebody else for anything. Like I said, it's terrible, this character. It's terrible, terrible. And when do we choose to do it? When we're doing the sunnah of salam. That's when we decide to make a comment. The objective of salam was to create love. But you start the conversation with speaking about the person, telling them how it looks like you haven't trained for 3 months and you're putting on weight, or you're like this, or you're so... It's so strange. And why? Because we don't understand what the Sharia actually wants from us. The salam is there to increase the love. We're using the salam to decrease the love. And so that's why I said some people, when they see someone, stay away from, I don't even want to do salam with that person, because the objective of that salam is not going to reach. It's going to make me feel bad about myself. So, لَيْسَ الْمُؤْمِنُ بِالطَّعَانِ a mu'min is not someone that constantly vilifies somebody. وَلَا la'an, nor someone who constantly curses others. La'nat upon this person, la'nat upon this person jahannami. It's not a believer. وَلَا الْفَاحِشْ وَلَا الْبَذِي, nor is he someone that's vile and speaks vile. So if you take both understandings, so someone who constantly swears and someone who constantly speaks of things that is inappropriate, and any person with a modest ear would not like to listen to that conversation. You have to, if you're in the midst of other people, you have to look around before you say what you say because it's not appropriate for this type of vulgar talk, which shouldn't be discussed. This is not the characteristic of a believer. It's not how Muslims are. So constantly swearing and speaking of vulgar things. And the ulama, they write, to stem from speaking is also the acts of doing evil and vulgar things. It's not from the characteristic of the believer. So Prophet ﷺ said, that's not a believer. لَيْسَ الْمُؤْمِنِ. A mu'min is not like that. Those who harbor those characteristics, or one of these characteristics, it means there's a lot of work that they have to do with their iman. Because that's not how a Muslim behaves, that's not how a Muslim talks, that's not the things that should come out of the tongue of a Muslim. And like I said, we live in a time where swearing is so common, it's so normal, it's so it's such a practice that even now in the professional places of work, unless you display a dislike and disdain towards swearing, at work it's also normal. People swear at one another and it's part of banter and part of speaking with one another. But it's not how a believer is. The characteristic of a believer is not one that, that swears literally. Let alone swears just in normal conversation. That how are you, and in the how are you, there's a swear word. How far have we gone from a sense of morality? That every second sentence has an F or a B or a swear word. It's not the characteristic of a believer. It's not how Muslims talk. So the tongue and amana from Allah, whether we have another session or not, depends on whether the moon is sighted. We'll find out. Hopefully we have one more day, inshallah. But if we don't, then the message throughout these sessions has been to safeguard the tongue. The Prophet ﷺ said, if you safeguard that limb and you safeguard your honor, I safeguard for you your Jannah. مَنْ يَضْمَنُ لِي مَا بَيْنَ لِحْيَيْ وَمَا بَيْنَ فَخِذَيْ أَضْمَنُ لَهُ الْجَنَّةِ. There's nothing more significant than that statement of the Prophet ﷺ. Allah give us all the tawfiq. Allah give us the understanding of using the tongue in the appropriate places. And if we have nothing good to say, Allah give us the sense to keep quiet, inshallah. Allah give us the tawfiq. Wa akhiru da'wan. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Subhanallah bihamdi. Subhanakallah bihamdik. Wa nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Jazakumullah khairan.